Hello and welcome everyone to another Android Developer Lab Plus. We will be getting started in just a minute. I'm just setting up the Google Developers Live link. So just bear with us and we'll be right back.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Okay, and we're good to go. So if you're tuning in online live right now, then you should be able to go to developers.google.com/live and go to ADL Plus. So let's start off with the usual introductions. I am Ankur Cotwell, and I'm joining you from Sydney, Australia. I'm also joined by my colleague and friend.
Hi, I'm Tony Chan from
Tony
joining.
is muted right now, so we can't hear him, but he'll fix that up in a second.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, we still can't hear him. So let me introduce Tony in the meanwhile. There's Tony Chan from Hong Kong, and one of our regular viewers, Andrew, has just joined as well. Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
Okay. All right, Tony. I cannot. Andrew, are you able to hear Tony?
Can you hear me?
Now
I
we
can,
can.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
There we
great.
go.
Yeah, so I'm Tony Chan, joining the Hangout from Hong Kong, and today we have the special topic for today is density independent pixel. And before that, let me share my screen. Hopefully this time we do it right. Give me a second. So can everyone see the slide all right?
Yep. Looks good here, Tony.
Okay, great. So let's talk about before we get to the DP subject today. Let's talk about news. So for this week we have ATT 21 Preview 3. It's mostly bug fixes and no new feature. But if you want to check it out, as always, like just go to tools.android.com. Another news this week is our colleague Roman Nuric has made a G+ post about chips in recipient text field. So this is what you guys usually see on the Google Plus client, and Roman has some details information about how where you can get the code from the AOSP website. So check that out. I have a Google short link here, so you can check it
Yeah,
out.
just to give you a background on that, we call it chips, but it's basically when you complete some contact information, rather than have the email address or the phone number show up, you get a nice little rectangular box with an image of the avatar of that person in that box and their name. So instead of having just a static email address, it's a much more pleasant piece of UI, and you can select that whole chip. If you want to clear it, or if you want to add a few more people, drag it around, that sort of thing. So it's just a nice bit of polish to add to your apps, and those are the little subtle differences that really make your app stand out compared to others. So Roman has basically in his post shown you where you can find it in the Android open source project. So the source code is already there. He's just showing you exactly where to look.
Cool. All right, so let's get to the topic of today, density independent pixel. So before we get to the details of what that is and what DP is, let's start with an overview to just get everyone on the same page with some definitions. So screen size is actually the physical size of any devices, any Android devices. So we have 4 categories: small, normal, large, and extra large. And then when we talk about screen density, it's really the quantity of pixel within a physical area of the screen. So a lot of people use dot per inch. This is the common terminology. And for resolution, it's closely related to screen density, but it's really talking about the total number of physical pixels on the screen. So when we talk about screen density and resolution, is really they are in proportional. So the higher the screen density, the higher the resolution. So what is the problem with pixel? Because as you guys already know, we introduced something called deep density independent pixel in Android, and we highly recommend everyone when you design layout using DP instead of pixel. But what is really the problem with pixel? Well, turns out pixel has many meanings, and what I really mean by that is let's go to the pixel, the definition of pixel. It's really based on a contraction of pix, which is coming from picture, and the EL is coming from element. So it's really an element of the smallest addressable element of it for display. But then when we talk about printer, pixel can be an ink droplet or even a unit of carbon particles. So as you can see, there are many different meanings based on the context. And in camera, pixel is really represent an image sensor element. So it's really have different meaning, depends on the terminology or context. Pixel has and also have different size and representation, because a pixel in a CRT monitor is different from a pixel from an LCD screen. So if you want to know more about the detail of pixel, you can go to Wikipedia to find out even more detail. So now we have density-independent pixel. So the key here is DP is really a physical length unit. So it's just like centimeter or meter. So it has a physical length in the real world. And of course, one thing in the very beginning, we use actually DIP as a shorthand, but then now is DP and DIP is kind of interchangeable, and you can still define things in your layout with both shorthand. Pixel is also a physical point, but then it doesn't have a fixed dimension. So it varies, depends on technology and how a particular device it could have many pixels in the same length. So we have a definition or a formula to translate between pixel and DP, and the formula is here is a pixel is equivalent to DP times the DPI over 160. And 160 is really the kind of the magic number, is because that's the density for MDPI. So in Android we have different screen densities listed here below here. It's LDPI, MDPI, high HDPI, etc. And the one I highlight in red, the TV DPI is particularly interesting at the moment, because it's the well, first of all, is the DPI for Google TV, and also as well as it's the latest Android tablet Nexus 7 density as well. So now, after we learn all these like concepts, let's get to some exercise. So so how many pixels are there in 1DP for our first Android phone, the G1 phone? Can someone make a guess? Turns out the answer is 1 pixel. And the reason is we use the G1 as the baseline for everything. Basically, the G1 phone is a normal screen size, and also have the MDPI resolution. Sorry for the typo there. Let's get to another exercise. So, how many pixels are there in 1DP for XHDPI device? Guess what? The answer is it depends, because for XHDPI is actually a range, and in most cases XHDPI is 320, but it depends on what device, and could be some device could be have like 325 or things like that, and so that's why it depends. And that actually makes this coming exercise easy, because now I specify the density of this XHDPI device to 320, and of course the answer here is 2 pixels. Okay, so another exercise. So what are the dimensions in DP for the following rectangle? So if you look at these rectangles, and if you remember our definition of a DP, which is I actually put the formula up there for your convenience. And if you remember, the MDPI is the baseline, which is 160. The answer is will be obvious, and the answer is 4DP. And because we are for the rectangle for the MDPI, we have 4 pixels on each side, and because that's the baseline, and we have 4 pixels, and the answer and that makes the answer 4DP. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about is the DPI ratio, because as you can see from the formula, it's really the current density of your device divided by 160, and because of there are actually ratio between all these different density, and just a convenient thing to remember is 3 to 4 to 6 to 8. So you can use these ratio easily to do the proper conversion to get pixel or DPs based on these ratios. Okay, so let's talk about the problem of using pixel PX in your layout. So here is an example of the effect of defining a 2x2 box in pixel in your layout. So as you can see, if you define something with pixel in the LDPI device, it occupies the entire rectangle. But as you move to different devices, you see the box actually is shrinking, because you define things in pixel, and in a higher density device, the pixel is actually smaller, and that's the reason why things are not scaled properly when you define things in pixel. So now let's take a look at the effect when you define things in DP. So in this case, because you define things in DP, and as I mentioned before, and hopefully you already remember, DP is a physical length unit. So if you define something with 2 dp, the representation across different resolution is the same. It's going to be the same, and that's what we meant by resolution independent. Okay, so what about bitmap assets? So the Android framework actually is quite intelligent, and it will scale bitmap drawables appropriately when using DP. But there is a big caveat here. The graphics here is, as you can see, if you it doesn't matter whether you are scaling up or scaling down, because there's no algorithm actually perfect algorithm to reproduce to scaling images. So if you scale up, you will, because you don't have enough information, you have to do interpolation, and that will create an image that is not sharp. But at the same time, if you're scaling down your image, there's a potential running into something called aliasing, which also can make your image not sharp at all also. So the conclusion here is you should create bitmap resources for each density of device you're targeting on. So what is SP? Because besides DP, there is also SP in Android. So SP is something we designed specifically for text. In the Android framework, there is an accessibility option to allow user to enlarge fonts, even they are specified in DP. So in that case, the formula is really, SP is really DP times some scaling factor determined by the user what kind of font scale they want to scale their fonts to larger fonts or smaller fonts. So it still somehow respect the DP make the text a kind of independent of resolution, but at the same time, if the user decide to scale it up for accessibility reasons, there is an extra scaling factor for user to specify. And after all these, so I hope by now you have a kind of a good grasp of what DP is, and because of all these like problem with pixel and that's why we kind of introduce a new size qualifier to do resource classification, and this new qualifiers allows more control over different specific like screen sizes to support your application. So the old size qualifier, which is small, normal, medium, large, extra large, and turns out because of the resolution issue, it's no longer good enough to classify by things like tablets. So for example, a 7-inch tablet has a size large, but so that makes actually tablet not necessarily equals to extra large, which is which breaks a lot of things. And by introducing these new qualifiers, so there are 3 of them. So one of them we call it smallest width. So the syntax is like SW and then the number and then the DP. So so the nice things about this smallest width is you don't need to care about the orientation of your device. So all you are specifying here is for a particular device, for the smallest width size of the tablet or the device, it has to be at least 600 dp in this case. So in that case, the resource under this resource folder will be selected for creating your layout, rendering the layout. There are two other qualifiers. One is specifically for width, and another one for height. But it's tricky because it really ups to the OEM define like which side is the width and which side is the height, and we usually see and recommend people using the smallest width, and that should take care of a lot of the cases. So one thing about compatibility. So before we introduce, Honeycomb 3.2, these qualifier doesn't exist, right? So in that case, we still recommend developer, especially if you are targeting pre-Honeycomb devices, you still need to specify a bucket to take care of like selecting tablets using extra large, for example. But in this case, there's one problem. As you can see, there are two files actually having the same tablet layout. The main activity XML is actually duplicate. So how to solve this problem? So one thing you can do is you can abstract out the tablet layout into a different using a different name. In this case, I call it main activity tablet.xml. And for in your resource folder under the using values, you can specify layout pointing to that particular XML. So I understand like the layout XML is still duplicates, but your content, your true layout is only defined once. So which is the key here. Finally, let's talk a little bit about screen support. So we have two tags in the Android framework to allow multiple screen support. So one of them is support screen, and in this case here, I want to filter out small and normal screen size. So this is the kind of the specification I need to do to set small screen and a normal screen to false. So how about this one? So is this the configuration to filter out small, only make your application available for small or normal size screen? Well, turns out the answer is wrong, because for support screen, that doesn't mean your application will not be available for large and extra large device. It just means that they're running in something we call compatibility mode for these two form factors. So how to filter out large or extra large screen device then? We have another tag actually can really do this. So in this case here, you're using something called compatible screen tag, and you have to specify all the screen you would like to support. So that's the one big caveat, and that's kind of the reason why we are not recommending developer to use this, because if you don't specify all the different combination, your application will not be available for those you didn't specify. And another thing is, after all, in Android we always looking for the application that support all devices, and that should be your ultimate goal. So that's pretty much for density independent pixel, and so we can switch to Q&A, or Anchor, if you have anything to add to this. Feel free to chime in.
No, that was quite comprehensive.
Cool.
So at this stage, I guess we can, given that we've just had a topic that that Tony's presented, are there any questions on the presentation from any of the live audience or anyone tuning into the stream even?
Yeah.
Hi. I would like to ask about pictures and images loaded from the internet, for example, Facebook. So if Facebook has a large image, say 180 pixels, on large devices with HDPI, they will be displayed as twice. So it will be like 90 DPI. Any strategies to like scale them?
Oh, so I think in that case is like back to the presentation is if you define your image dimension using DP, the Android framework will automatically actually scale the image up for you. But then again, you run into the issue of the interpolation. You will not have a perfect image, and that's why we suggest developer to create different assets in the right resolution for that particular density.
As a just general strategy, though, if you're pulling down, in your situation, you said you were pulling down assets from the net, and you might not have, a different resolutions of those images. Consider whether you think stretching that image is really the right thing to do, and certainly consider whether you want to stretch it to as big as you can get. There might be a middle ground that makes more sense, like 1.5 times in every dimension. Where it doesn't look too blurry, but it is what it is. So if your source image is low resolution, there's only so much that you're going to be able to do with it.
Okay, thank you.
There was a question. There was a couple of questions on moderator that have been added, Tony, on this topic. So let's deal with those ones first. Then today, is it possible, and how to provide different graphics? Except 9 patches for 2 different devices running, for example, at 800 by 480 and 540 by 960 on Android 2 and 2.3 without checking the resolution via Java source and setting the proper graphics. So my understanding of this question is the person's asking, how do I make it scale without having to manually do it myself? Is that your understanding, Tony?
Yeah. So based on what the question there, yeah.
Yeah. So what I would suggest is actually just, if you're just going to render it in a view, just use like an image view. Just use the properties that we provide there that allow that where you can specify whether you want it to stretch to fit, or you want it to scale, or you want it to crop. There's a couple of options there that you should really have a look at. And see what makes sense. So in that case, the Android framework is doing the work for you. So just keep in mind, however, though, as we just said to Konstantin, that it may not make sense to always stretch a low-res image to a bigger size. So in terms of providing the best user experience, because that's the goal at the end of the day, you might have to have some logic in there that says, hey, if I'm pulling down some image from an online source and I don't know what resolution it will be, do I want to make it bigger than it is, or do I want to shrink it, so on and so forth. If you're providing your own assets, as long as you're kind of reasonably in the ballpark, I would probably try and render the image slightly higher than it needs to be, and then put it in the relevant resolution bucket, and then just size my UI based on DPs, just like Tony described today.
Yep. I think the second question we have on moderator is whenever we read the dimension of device screen, example 480 times 800. 1024 times 600 in the device specification, is that value in pixel or DP or DIP? So, My understanding is those numbers are in pixel, and also another thing is DP and DIP are the same thing. Yeah. So.
I think that was a trick question to try and catch us out, Tony. So we picked it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I want to comment is when we've talked about like designing layout in DP, it's really what we are talking about is we want the experience on a particular physical size consistent regardless of resolution. So we are not saying like using DP in your layout will scale properly in different size of device. That's actually is a misconception. So what we are talking about here is if you design a 7-inch layout for a 7-inch device, and if you are specifying all these dimensions in DP, it will guarantee to work on all the 7 inches devices, regardless of resolution, and that's the power of DP. It's not. We are not saying like if you define a 7-inch layout using DP, it will work in a 10-inch device. That's not true. And you have what you should do is you should define a layout for a tangent in form factor, and you may choose to have like using more fragment or different design, and things should be still done in DP so that your layout will work on 10 inches device with different resolution. So that's the key concept here.
Yeah, I might just add to that, Tony. That in general, my experience has been that 7-inch devices and 10-inch devices, you can actually reuse the same layout in general, and it works really well and it scales nicely. I mean, assuming you're building nice scalable user interfaces. Mm-hmm. One big differentiating factor that I find between 7-inch tablets and 10-inch tablets, however, is that the default orientation of a 10-inch tablet is landscape mode, whereas the default orientation of just about all the 7-inch tablets I've seen is portrait mode. So that's something that you should consider as to how your layout might change between portrait mode and landscape mode. So to me, the big differentiating factor is actually the orientation as opposed to the physical size of the screen.
Right. I mean, like if you do things like using like field parents or wrap for the container, so things will flow properly when you go from a 7-inch to 10 to a 10-inch device. But one thing to remember is if you specify things in DP, those access or controls will stay the same size regardless of the in 7-inch or 10-inch. So, but if you do the container or the layout container properly, and they will doing using percentage, and things will work fine. So.
Yeah. So I think that's all the questions that we had on this week's topic. So Tony, thanks for covering DPs. The one thing we talked about was sort of the advantages of DP, but the big takeaway I think developers should really go back with is don't use pixels in your layout, right? Don't specify user interfaces with pixels because that is not going to scale across the wide ecosystem of devices that we have. So, build scalable user interfaces, and DPs are certainly one way to do that. And the other way of building sort of flexible user interfaces is using things like wrap content or fill parent on your layouts as well.
Okay.
All right. So we've got 3 other questions on here, Tony. I'll just take them from the top.
Sure.
I'm implementing in-app billing, but when I try to buy some item in the sample app, I don't get a response from my app, and after a few minutes I get an error of reason took too long to deliver. This bug was in the known issues for almost a year. Is there an update? I didn't know it was a known issue, and certainly I've played with in-app billing and I haven't had this particular issue, so I don't know if you've got more to add, Tony, but it'd be great if this person, BRNO, would contact us separately and just let us know what the issue, if he's got he or she have a bug raised.
I'm not aware that there is a bug, but one thing that may cause that reason took too long to deliver is some of the transaction orders is actually maybe flagged as fraud or from our risk engine. And so I think one thing developers should have expectation is there are a certain percentage of orders that will be flagged as potential risk fraud. So and for those orders it will not go through, and that's the result of could be a result of that took too long and.
It shouldn't happen in the test app though, because if he or she are using that sample app, it should be using the package names that are using the test nomenclature. So
okay.
The risk engine side shouldn't come into play. But I'd love to hear more from you.
But there are developers telling some transaction are failing, and so may not be this case here, but that could be a potential problem. Sometimes if you see transaction didn't go through, and I hate to say it's normal, but it does happen. Like some transaction won't go through for risk reason.
Yeah. Cool. So please do contact Tony or myself, and we can have a deeper dive in it. I guess we'd need to see a little bit more as to exactly what you're doing, and we can try and take it from there. Okay, according to the Google Cloud Messaging tutorial, a wake lock is required in order to handle the registration action. How can the device handle registration response, but in sleep mode when sending a request to a third-party server? Any other examples of services requiring a wake lock?
I know an example. So we have an open source project called Chrome to Phone. And there should be implementation on the things you described. In terms of handle registration response in sleep mode, Anchor, I don't know. Do you have any insight on this part?
No, I mean in general, I think it's good practice to acquire the wake lock if you're waiting for a response, because these things, your request responses are asynchronous in nature. So if you actually want to make sure that you are, awake, so to speak, for that duration, then you should do so. Just be careful in terms of acquiring that wake lock, because you want to try and minimize how long you've got it for, because of course the device is not able to sleep at that point in time, so it's a drain on the battery.
Yeah, I agree. So the last question. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah. I would like to add more about this question. For example, I have a foreground service which uses WebSocket connection to the server, and definitely the user can push the power button for the device to go in sleep mode. Does it mean that I still need to acquire wake lock, or so the connection won't be broken?
If you want to maintain the persistence of your connection, then I would recommend yes, but I would also ask you to really think about whether that connection needs to be persisted throughout, and that's one of the benefits of Google Cloud Messaging, right? So you don't have to have a wake lock the whole time or a connection to your server. You can have a notification come through or a message come through, and then you can spring to action then. It's event-based rather than you having to maintain this persisting connection.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the last question we have here is, can you recommend the best way to implement themes in Android? Since you plan to cover DPI and other related topics, maybe consider having an info about themes too. Well, so first of all, that's a great suggestion, and I think like that theme itself could be another ADL plus presentation. So definitely we'll look into that, and hopefully we'll have another session about themes specifically in the future. Yep.
Yeah. In the meantime, though, we've actually got a fairly extensive section in the on developer.android.com in the guide section on styles and themes, and it walks you through sort of how to do some basic styling. I think that's a great place to get started. There are more sort of community-based examples that I've seen that go to a larger extent. So I'd seen a community effort for building the Holo theme for older Android versions, for example. So what I'd suggest is start with this guide and then go have a look at some of these community efforts and see how people are building and building advanced themes, so to speak. But yes, thanks for the suggestion. I think that's a good idea for a future topic as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyone else have any questions?
I had one.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Who, me or?
Talking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there we go. Now we can hear you. Yep.
I just had one in the chat window there. When I'm using sort of 9 patches, do I need to specify a PNG file for each of the different DPI buckets, or do I just need to have one in my drawable folder that will cover me for everything?
I think you could get away with just having the one. I wouldn't put it in the drawable folder. We actually have one called the drawable-no DPI, which is kind of like the explicit one to say that this applies to every bucket.
Right.
I mean, it will work, but just from a best practices point of view, we recommend using the no DPI nomenclature.
Cool.
Yeah, I think using 9 patches, it can be another topic in future we can talk about too. So.
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't need to have sort of a high-res 9 patch for high-res devices and a sort of a low-res one.
Well, potentially you can actually. Depends how big the image is, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing it for styling, UI, then maybe you can get away without it. But if you're doing, high-res images that you're expecting to stretch, as like a background.
Just things like buttons and stuff like that. So at the moment, I've been kind of using defining them in XML using gradients and stuff and strokes, so that I don't have to have a 9 patch instead, and that seems to work quite well. But I was just thinking if I needed a more fancy button that couldn't be defined using a sort of a gradient, then I might have to use 9 patches.
Yeah, you'd probably. I mean, ideally, you should be building assets for each of those buckets. But if it's something really small, like your 9 patch is really tiny, then it might be overkill. Yeah. There is no. I don't think it's an exact science, so you kind of have to use your judgment as to at what point you should sort of break the code and say, no, I do need to build specific 9 patches for each of those buckets.
Cool. Cheers.
Yeah.
All right, we've just had one other person join.
Can I ask one more question about the layouts?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So going back to my question about images from net. For example, if I have an image 180 pixels width, so is it the best option to set the maximum width for like G1 devices for MDPI? Otherwise, it will be like more than a half screen width, and leave them as is for HDPI devices in the image view.
So just so I make sure that I've understood your question, do you mean whether you should scale the image down or shrink it so that it's not occupying too much physical space on the device?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely do that. I would shrink it where possible. I mean, where it makes sense. So there is some work that you need to do if you're pulling assets from some remote server that whose resolution you don't have any control over, as to what makes sense for your UI. So if it only makes sense for your, whatever it is to be only 30% of the width of the screen, then that's going to, that 30%, the actual number of the size of it is going to differ depending on which device you're running on, right? So yeah, absolutely, you'd want to scale that. So things like linear layouts can help there because you can set weights and so on and have it done for you. But it really depends how custom built your UI is and how much control you're exerting over it.
Is that what the scale type is for on the image view? No, to say center fit or center crop, that kind of stuff.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah. But on top of that, if you're doing it based on weights, then you need the linear layout weights to come through as well, over and above that, right? But the scale type will definitely say, hey, if my view is bigger than the image, then what should I do with it? So yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Well, if there is nothing else, thank you for joining us this week. I suspect that we are actually going to we're not going to run the ADL Plus next week. Because of a scheduling conflict, but we will be back soon. Yeah, again, keep the feedback coming. We've had quite a few suggestions for topics that we should cover in the future, and we are definitely taking that on board and prioritizing accordingly.
Hello.
Oh, hi there.
Hi. Can I have one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm the guy with the in-app billing problem. You responded before, and I have one question. My first payment was from a credit card where I don't have enough money, and yes, it can be problem when I add another card, and after some more payments, I've got cancellation of these payments. Can it be those problem? If you understand.
Yeah. So, Tony, do you want to grab this one?
I can show you. It's some screen share.
Yeah, so just be careful about showing any of your credit card details because that won't be a good thing.
Well, maybe we can do this offline. You can.
I can show you. That's no problem.
No, I don't think we should actually. I think it's better that we don't.
Let's do that offline. Yeah.
Okay.
When it comes to payment, that sort of stuff can be quite sensitive. So what I'd suggest is, look, we'll wrap up the ADL Plus here, and let's solve your. Tony and I will contact you straight afterwards, and we'll continue our discussion through that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.